Rise America.
Now, the war in Ukraine has cost thousands of lives and devastated an entire country. As we have reported over the past several weeks, many international companies have decided to exit the Russian market, either out of principle or due to supply chain issues. These companies are now being urged to start looking at major investments in Ukraine as the country prepares to rebuild itself after the Russian attacks. Now, earlier this week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told the G7 group of nations that rebuilding the country will be one of the biggest economical projects of this generation. Well, for more on this, let's cross live to London, where we are joined by Andy Hunder, President of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine. Andy, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Why is now a good time for companies to start looking at investing in the rebuilding of Ukraine?
Thank you, Dan. Now is exactly the time to start preparing. Ukraine is in the midst of the war, but we strongly believe that Ukraine will come out as victors in this war, and there will be a massive rebuilding of the whole country that needs to take place. We've seen the devastation that Russia has caused on the lives of thousands of Ukrainians, and the damage that's been done. Some cities have been totally wiped out. And the message is clear that there is no future for business in Russia, no future for clean business in Russia, either morally, ethically, or now legally. The US, President Biden signed an executive order on April 6th prohibiting any new investment by US entities in Russia. I think now the companies that are packing their bags, that have left Russia, they are looking at new markets. And our message is clear, Ukraine will be an EU, it already has been accepted as an EU candidate member country. It's a big country on track to become an EU member in Central Europe. A big population, 40 million population, very highly talented population in very different sectors. I mean, the traditional sectors have been, it's been the breadbasket of the world for centuries. It's been feeding, unfortunately now due to Russia's blockade of the Black Sea, that has been obstructed. But I think, there's sectors in agriculture, IT, technologies. Ukraine has a booming IT sector. In terms of manufacturing and many, many others. So I think, it really now is the time for companies, US companies, multinationals, to look at the future for Ukraine and start planning now, because the war, as soon as it ends, it will not be waiting another 6 months to draw up plans. So we are speaking with companies and we are saying, this is why now is the time to plan for the future as soon as the war is over.
Now, I understand that your organisation has undertaken a survey called Doing Business After 120 Days of War. I mean, what have you found from that survey?
Well, Dan, I think the key findings are that 60% of the companies continue to operate. More are partially operating. I think we're still seeing that some have had damaged goods, had damaged property. We see around 20-25% that have seen damage to their facilities due to Russian missile strikes. I think, the key sectors like the agriculture, the ports are still very much closed because Russia has blocked them off. And we see over 100 vessels that are still stuck in the ports and they're not being allowed in or out of the ports. So I think that is a key priority to focus on. But what we've seen, the number one issue really, Dan, is the resilience. The internet works better in wartime Kiev than it does in many capitals of peacetime capitals across the world. We see the mobile phone networks are up and running across the country. We see the banking sector. The banking sector has done a phenomenal job keeping online and in branch payments going. Many of the banks had to give up their armored cash vehicles to the military, but still, at least half of them are still delivering cash to cash point machines, to the ATMs across the country. So there's cash available in small towns And even during a war, that continues. We're seeing companies such as lift operators that are managing and servicing lifts in hospitals, in residential high rises. So I think, what the message is clear is the resilience that Ukraine has shown, not only on the battlefield, we're standing up against Putin's army. I mean, the resilience has been quite phenomenal, but not only on the battlefield, but also in the business, the resilience that Ukrainians are showing. And that is why people want to work with people that take on responsibility, people that know what leadership is. And that's what we're saying, now is the time to start preparing to work in Ukraine as soon as the war is over.
And do you think that the war in Ukraine has highlighted the country's importance in the world, especially the food industry? You mentioned about being the breadbasket of the world. I think a lot of people didn't realise how important it was, and now we're seeing food prices throughout the globe shoot up in costs, and also the availability of getting products is getting harder. And I think Ukraine has been underestimated for that in the past.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the years before the war, Ukraine has and is number one in the world for sunflower production and export, number one for sunflower oil. It's a key exporter, especially to the continent across Africa, in terms of sunflower, wheat, corn, soya, rapeseed. So these are real sort of soft commodities that are so important in the diet, in a stable daily diet of 400 million people across the globe. And I think, what we have seen is that with Russian warships in the Black Sea, I think the commercial vessels and the insurers, they see this as a challenge too big to take on. So we are really pushing to have the Black Sea unblocked as soon as possible, to get those Russian missiles, to get those Russian warships out of the Black Sea, to allow free passage, safe passage of commercial vessels, the Panamaxes, to come into the ports in Odessa, in Mykolaiv and across, to bring the corn, the sunflower, the wheat to 400 million people across the African continent and globally. And I think that is something that must happen ASAP, because Russia has created a global food crisis, and this needs to be resolved as soon as possible.
And before you go, Andy, I mean, what efforts are there in Ukraine for rebuilding? We've seen in the past when countries are rebuilding after conflict that they can almost be very closed and very strict on who they allow in. I mean, are they welcoming companies from overseas with open arms to in effect be part of their future?
Absolutely. I think there will be a number of sources where this funding will come from. I think there will be grants from governments, there will be loans from development banks, there will be assets seized for Russian assets, which will with time be sold on, and those assets, those proceeds will be able to fund the destroyed residential buildings that Russian rockets have destroyed. But mostly a lot of it will also be from the private sector. And this is global. I mean, next week, there will be a major international conference in Switzerland, and it's called the Ukraine Recovery Conference. And I think there, the private sector will meet the governments of the world. And so, we'll be talking very much in detail about the recovery, when to start the recovery planning, to have the plans in place, and really for companies to start planning, to start budgeting investments. And these will be starting from sectors in reconstruction. You can see on the images how much of the buildings has been damaged. The glass, the cement, the bricks, the insulation. This will be in terms of all kinds of infrastructure, including roads, bridges, hospitals, schools. There's so much that needs to be done. But again, it's a modernization. So using energy efficient materials, using latest technologies, and a lot of it will be leapfrogging the technologies. And I think, in any reconstruction, any rebuilding, there is a strong point of modernization using latest technologies, latest materials to build a new Ukraine that has chosen a future based on European values of human dignity, of freedom, and of independence. And I think it's really the Ukrainian people have shown that the resilience in fighting Putin's army on the ground across Ukraine, and this battle continues. And I think we do believe in Ukraine's victory, hopefully very soon.
Well, Andy, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for joining us, and best of luck with the challenges ahead. And please do come back and let us know how progress is making. But for now, thank you, Andy Hunder, President of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine.
This is Arise America.